For this tank, I built this aluminum stand using 4040 T-slot aluminum bars, which is overkill for a 20-gallon tank, but I already had this aluminum collecting dust in my storage locker. This style of stand is super easy to build. Aluminum cuts very easily and cleanly with the right saw blade, and all you really need is an Allen wrench to assemble it. I love the simple look of the stand and the open bottom from an all-in-one tank that doesn't need a sump. All of the equipment controllers and power bricks are stuck under the tank, which is a technique I borrowed from Jake Adams' innovative marine tanks in the Reef Builder studio. This build cost me less than 50 bucks. Granted, the T-slot bars are not cheap, but I already had them, so for me, it was a cheap build. Even buying new aluminum bars, the stands can still be cheaper, or about the same price as buying one of the new flimsy flat pack stands that most all-in-ones are bundled with. So here's the breakdown of the cost for my build. The angle bracket kit cost 28 bucks on Amazon, but the bolts didn't work, so I had to buy a 50 pack and a 10 pack, which was like 15 bucks and 6 bucks, so the whole thing cost me, I think, 49 bucks. The saw blade is not cheap, but I had it from my previous build. That's another 80 bucks at a normal hardware store, probably cheaper online. But that saw cuts aluminum super clean, so I would recommend that. I'm not sure if a normal wood blade would work.
So here's my plans. I'm going to do the top and the bottom the same. So it's going to be the top and the bottom with the long post in between. This front longer piece in the back, they're both going to be resting on the post. They're going to be kind of supporting. All the weight is going to be on this bar and then the top bar.
When you cut, make sure you're aware of the blade thickness. So when I'm cutting here, the piece on the right is the piece that I measured. So if I went by the laser, which is going by the left side cut, I would lose the thickness of the blade. So usually what you want to do is pull the blade down and make sure you find the widest part of the blade and touch the line that you want to cut. So the long bars that act as the height of the stand are not really that important to get the length perfectly right, as long as all four are about the same. What I do is I measure as close as possible to what I want. I cut the very first piece, and then I will fit each cut bar to the bar I'm about to cut to make sure that the blade barely grazes the already cut bar, so I know that when I cut it, it's going to be the exact same length. If you go by just measuring, you'll probably end up with a lot more variation as things slip. You can't really line up the line very well with the blade. Those lasers that come on a lot of chop saws are not always that accurate. So with this method, you might not always get the exact cut if you don't have like a jig in place, but at least every cut is going to be the exact same length.
So I'm back at home with all of my cut pieces. Not every piece is exactly the same length, but I think it's close enough, probably within a millimeter. There's some aluminum flake on some of the edges, so if you just get like a screwdriver or something and kind of carve those out, they come off very easily. So this will only take a few minutes. There's a little bit of discrepancy in some of the sizes. You know, using a chop saw like that, you're not gonna get the exact same size without some sort of jig to hold it in place. But I don't think a millimeter here or there is gonna make a difference. I think what happened is, as I was trying to line it up, some of the original edges had like scuffed up edges that prevented them from lining up perfectly, but I'm not too worried about it. It should be fine once I put it together. This is the hardware I got off Amazon for the 4040 aluminum. So there are the T-slot, I guess you could call them bolts, and then the bolts, and then the corner brackets. So this corner bracket's pretty much the same thing I used for my main tank's light rail, but we're gonna use them again. I didn't have these last time because I was worried about the bolts not fitting in the slots. I took them down from my apartment. They were originally used as room dividers, and then when I installed actual walls and doors, I took them all down and saved them. So they're like 15, 16 years old. I'm not sure if it's the same dimensions as what they sell now. So I didn't know if these would fit, but I did try them out and they fit perfectly, so that's great. So this should be a very fast install of putting all of this stuff together. Now I know some of you might be saying that using 40/40 aluminum bars is overkill for a 25-gallon aquarium, and I'm very well aware of that. But in my family, we like to overbuild things, and I had this aluminum already, so for me, it prevents me from having to buy more material. So that's how it's going to lay out. If you're not familiar with how these work, you basically have this T-slot, I guess you could call it a nut. It slides in there, and then you would put your bracket like such, and then screw it tight. Well, turns out this is not going to be as easy as I thought, because these bolts are way too long. As you can see, this is tight. That is into the inner channel, but it's still loose. All right, so we are back. I now have bolts that will fit. So I just tested these out and they are the perfect size. So I am going to get underway.
When you start fitting everything together, try to get it as close as possible, but don't over tighten because you probably will end up having to make some adjustments. So if you over tighten it, then you're just gonna have to loosen it and kind of make some adjustments. What I did was I tried to square it up by eye, tighten it just enough so it won't move. And then once I get the vertical bars going, then you kind of have to loosen certain corners here and there and kind of make sure everything squares up right. So when you get to this part, make sure you add the T-slot nuts into the slots before you seal it up. I did not, and then I realized after the fact that I couldn't get the T-slot nuts in there, and I had to take it apart and slide them in. So it didn't take me that long to fix, but it was still a pain in the ass. The vertical bars are a little tougher to fit, but I recommend dry fitting. Get all the bolts and screws in place, but don't overly tighten them yet. And then slowly tighten them little by little. And then once everything seems secure and solid, then go back through every bolt and give it like a really strong tighten. I did that and I think it worked pretty well. So when I tightened the shit out of everything at the end, I could kind of feel the bolt digging into the aluminum inside that slot a little bit, which is kind of what I wanted because then that will prevent anything from slipping over time.
So here's the finished stand. I still have the bottom brace here, so I'm gonna add that once I get more screws for it, and then this thing is done. Because my tile is not exactly level, each tile themselves, I'm probably gonna put little felt pads on each of the corners just so it kind of acts as a leveling agent. But so far, I just need to clean up the aluminum, but I think it looks pretty good.
So I hope this video has been helpful for any of you guys that want to make an aluminum style stand. I know there's probably a lot of videos and posts about how to make these things, but I figured I would throw this up here for my 25-gallon build series.